About three little words this morning: written in forever. That's what we're dealing with for these last 2 weeks. We're in the final week today. These three words, and it turns out that they're not so little at all, are they? They're rather jam-packed with stuff that we need: faith, hope, and love. And today we're talking about hope, which may be the most misunderstood of the three. You know, it's right in the middle of them, but in Paul's list of 1 Corinthians 13. But it is partly because of the way we use it in our vernacular that we struggle with this idea of hope. But it's not the way that it's used in the Bible. The way that we typically use it is very different. Often, we use the word hope to describe what? Wishful thinking, right? I hope something's going to happen, but it's just wishful thinking on my part. I don't have any way to prove it's going to happen. I just hope that it will. Such as if you were planning a picnic, maybe for maybe in the next day or two, and you thought, you know, I hope the weather's going to be nice, but you get up, you know, maybe Monday morning, and there's these dark clouds that are rolling in, or even later tonight, and you say, oh, that looks like it could rain. But I hope that it doesn't. But you don't really have any way of making sure that. It's just wishful thinking. You're thinking, boy, I really want my picnic, and I really hope, I really wish that it wouldn't rain right now. But you can't do anything to stop that. Or maybe when you're going to a restaurant on a Friday night, even around here, and you get there and you realize that golly, Cracker Barrel has people lined up all the way out the door, and you're in your wishful thinking, you're saying, I hope we don't have to wait too long to get a table. But the empirical evidence around you seems to say, yeah, you're going to wait quite a while if you're going to eat there at Cracker Barrel on that Friday evening. But we wish, or we hope, that it's going to have. So hope many times is really about wishful thinking. You remember Morgan Freeman, the actor, was in the movie Shawshank Redemption, and he sees hope as a negative thing in that movie. He says, if you've ever seen the movie, he says to this young inmate, he's a lifer in prison in the state penitentiary, and this young man comes in also for life, and he says, let me tell you something, my friend. Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. It's got no use on the inside. You better get used to the idea. And for a lot of us, that's how we feel about hope. We wonder why in the world God would put those words in there. Why would Paul say so many times we have this hope, and yet we see it as a dangerous thing? We wonder, you know, is this I get hurt every time I hope, because what I hope for never seems to come about, and I don't understand why. But I want you to understand that today we're not talking about wishful thinking. That is not what we're talking about. Today, we're talking about something that is calculated. We're talking about not wishful thinking, but calculated optimism. It is optimism based on some things that we can calculate that are likely to happen. And so it's talking about the idea that you've got some insider information on what's about to happen, or why it's happening, that the rest of the world may not know. And that is a sure thing. There are things that you have, that you know as a believer, as a Christian, that the unsaved world does not understand. And they don't have that same information that you have. They don't have that kind of information. For example, how that would work, having insider information would be, if you're planning that picnic and you're seeing the clouds rolled in, but you happen to be that you work at the National Weather Bureau and you have an advanced degree in meteorology and you have access to all of these wonderful, very powerful satellite images, and so you have a hope that it's not going to rain because the empirical evidence is telling you, yeah, there's really no water in those clouds and they're just going to roll on by. And so you go ahead and plan your picnic. Or you want to go to dinner at the Cracker Barrel and you're thinking, that, boy, there's a line all the way out, But the guy or the lady who's at the front desk is one of your very best friends, and she has told you that when you come, as soon as you get there, you'll get the very next table. And so you walk in with the hope that you're going to sit down really fast, even though the line's going out the door, because you have insider information that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily have. And so when I talk about hope, I'm not talking about wishful thinking founded in just futility. I'm talking about a calculated optimism that is based on this insider information that, in spite of what the current trends may seem to indicate in your life and in our world, you know a few things that shed a whole new light on your situation. That's the kind of hope that we have. And that's why this topic, this idea of hope, is so vitally important, because I know that there are probably a lot of you here today who are on the ledge of wishful thinking. You're just teetering and thinking, well, I don't know what else to do but just to wish hopefully. I just have to think nice thoughts. Your circumstances may be so dire right now, and your situation seems so out of control that your outlook doesn't seem to hold very much promise. And because of that, you may find yourself saying things such as, what's the use? Why bother to go on? Why should I keep trying? Why shouldn't I just throw in the towel? You ever find yourself saying those things? Because you've practiced wishful thinking and called it hope. You've looked at what the Bible says that you have hope, and all you know is wishful thinking. And when you try to marry those two things together, it doesn't get you anywhere, and you're just frustrated, and you feel like there's nothing good going to happen. And if you ever felt that way, then you need to do something today. You need to embrace, and I mean you need to fully embrace the biblical concept of hope. And we're going to talk about that because I want you to understand what it is that God gives to you and what He is calling you to do, the kind of life that He's calling you to. And it's not the kind of wishful thinking that sounds like a life in a Disney movie where everything works out without any problems magically, and the sunshine comes out and the roses grow up and it's a beautiful ending. That's not what we're talking about. That's not the kind of calculated optimism that you see that will see you through every storm of your life. And we're going to go through storms based on the Word of God and the power of God and the goodness of God. Hope says, I will get you through. And so that's where we need to be. So today we're going to talk about becoming a person of hope. Faith, hope, and love. Last week I mentioned the fact that faith, hope, and love those three words are used a lot in combination together. All through the New Testament, you see them. Sometimes it's two of them, sometimes it's three of them, and so we see them a lot. It's found again here in the 5th chapter. They're found here in the 5th chapter together of Romans. Paul mentions faith and love, but he's talking primarily in this passage about hope. So let's look at them together. Today we're in Romans chapter 5, verses 2 through 5, calculated hope. And here we see Paul saying, and we rejoice in the hope that the glory of God, not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out His love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, whom He has given us. And so we're talking about calculated hope because I want to get past the idea that hope is something that you're just lucky enough to feel at certain times. That somewhere this feeling just comes over you in a bad time in your life, or in a time when you're wanting something, and so this feeling of hope comes along, and once in a while you might get lucky enough to have that. Because in reality, hope is never a feeling. It is never intended to be a feeling, and it is not a feeling from a biblical standpoint. It's more like a calculated decision that then is demonstrated by a deliberate action or actions. It is something that you have decided, and then you act on that decision, and you put it into action. It has nothing to do with feelings. And so you can say that hope really is a choice that you're going to make. So last week we talked about 3 choices that you need to make in order to develop congruent faith, so that your life and your faith line up side by side and on top of each other exactly. And this week we're going to look at 3 choices necessary to develop that calculated hope. That is a decision that then has action that follows it. So 3 choices necessary to develop calculated hope this morning. The first one is simply this: dare to rejoice. You got to learn to rejoice. You got to dare to rejoice. Like hope, rejoice is not a feeling. Rejoicing is not a feeling. It's an action word. It's a choice that you make. The Bible never commands us to feel anything. If you go all the way through the Bible, you don't find anywhere where God says, feel this way. And He commands you to do it. Because a feeling's a feeling, and you don't have a lot of choice over those. So He doesn't command feelings, and yet this is a command that we're to give. He doesn't command us to feel certain ways, but He does command us to act in certain ways, and He commands us to do certain things, and one of those is to rejoice. And for example, Philippians 3:1, Paul said, "Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord." He doesn't say feel rejoicing in the Lord, feel happy in the Lord. He says rejoice in the Lord. He makes it a command. He says it again in Philippians 4:4, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice." Because rejoicing is something that can be commanded, because it is a choice. You choose to rejoice. And so in Romans 5, in verse 2, Paul says again, "And we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God." So he says we make a choice to rejoice in the glory of God. And that means that you choose to take joy now, because we know that ultimately God will cause things to work together for good. So we can choose to rejoice before that even happens. We can choose to rejoice because we know who God is. And even though we may not see it yet, we can make a calculated decision to be joyful today about what God will bring our way further down the road. And so we make that calculated decision, and then we can begin to act on that calculated decision, even though we're not there yet to where we want to be. For example, we can rejoice, as Jesus said, that our names are written in heaven. Have you been to heaven yet? No. Doesn't matter what the books say, you haven't been there yet. Because if you'd been there, you'd still be there. So, but do we believe God? And we say, all right, God, because you have shared this insider information with me, now I can act with rejoicing in my heart, and I can make decisions, and I can take actions rather based on that. That I'm going to have this bright and blessed future that awaits for me in eternity, even though it's not always bright and blessed today, right here. Also, we can go through trials and tribulations today, and we can rejoice in knowing that God has promised to see us through no matter what happens. And so we act on that. And so Paul says we can choose to rejoice now for the victory that we'll experience in the future, because we know that victory will ultimately be ours. And will ultimately, and that God will ultimately bring it about. And then Paul takes this choice to rejoice thing just a step further. He says, not only are we able to rejoice in the promises that are certainly coming our way further down the line, but we can also make the choice to rejoice in the middle of what's happening right now. It's not just about someday in eternity. It's not just about 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, or 40 years from now, when all my problems are gone, because they're never going to be gone in this lifetime. There'll always be new ones that are coming along. It's not just about those. It is about what's happening right now. And so in verse 3 of Romans 5, he says, not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings. And I'm going to stop right there because, he says, but I'm going to finish that verse in just a minute. But we rejoice in our sufferings because. First, I want to just tell you that we have some insider information on the problems that we face. If you're a believer, if you know Christ as your Savior, you have some insider information here that you get to act on. You can make a calculated choice, a calculated decision, and then you can act on it. The Bible never says that God sends your way all of the tests and the trials and the temptations that you face. God is not the author of your suffering. Not at all. But here's the insider information that's going to help you see those problems in a different light. God says He can take those problems. He can take those trials. He can take those temptations, those testings, those sufferings, whatever they are that come your way, and make something good out of them. That's insider information you had. Just like Nehemiah said in Nehemiah 13:2, our God, however, turned the curse into blessing. That's insider information. I may not like what I'm going through right now. It may hurt what I'm going through right now, but God is not apart from me. He is right here with me, and He will take that and He will use it and turn it into something that is a blessing in my life. And I can now choose to rejoice in that. I can choose to make a decision to move forward and to act on that because God has the power to turn something painful into something beautiful. And so Paul tells us in verses 3 and 5 again, he says, because we can rejoice because, now he says, even though in our sufferings, we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope, and hope does not disappoint us. Paul is saying that when anything is happening in your life that you don't like, anything that brings pain your way, whether it's great or small, you can dare to rejoice, even knowing that because of your relationship with Jesus Christ, the only thing that this problem can do is strengthen you. The struggle can only strengthen you. It can strengthen your resolve, it can strengthen your character, it can strengthen your outlook on life, and for that you can find reason to rejoice. Say, God, even in this is worth rejoicing in. And so if you choose to look at your problems that way, through the biblical eyes of hope, then you can dare to rejoice even in the midst of all of it, because you know that this moment of suffering ultimately is nothing more than a servant that can help you become stronger. And so hope says, I know this isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. See, we're so prone to say, God, why are you letting this happen to me? Why is this happening? And Paul says, it's not happening to you. God is allowing it to happen for you. It is for your strengthening. It is for your development. It is for those things that will bring reason to rejoice in your life. That problem is helping me produce the qualities I most want in my life. I want to have those qualities that he talks about. I want to have perseverance and character in my life. And that happens because God sees me through those things. And so I can rejoice in what God is going to do. Calculated hope means that we dare to rejoice even when there seems little to rejoice about. And that's the first choice that you have to make today. Second choice you have to make, besides daring to rejoice, is dare to endure. You got to dare to endure. Paul told people in the church at Thessalonica that he thanked God for their endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ, he tells us in 1 Thessalonians 1:3. He thanked God for their what? For their endurance. For their endurance. There's a connection, friends, between endurance and hope in the Bible. There's something that happens in our lives when we choose to endure that then helps us to develop the hope the biblical hope that God wants us to have. In today's text, Paul talks about that connection again. He says again in verse 3, perseverance, another way of saying perseverance, same Greek word, endurance, leads to character, and character leads to hope. And so let me share a truth with you today. Our truth for today is this: hope is not a feeling. Not commanded to feel hope. Hope is not a feeling. Hope is an action. It's not a feeling. It is an action. Therefore, it can be commanded. And one of the ways that we act out hope is that we stick with it even when we don't feel like sticking with it. So I tried that before and it didn't work. I don't want to do it again. I don't feel like it. Who cares what you feel like? The Bible says do it anyway. Because it's not about your feelings. It's about what's right. It's about your belief in who God is and who Jesus Christ is in your life. What He said He's going to do. What He's going to make you into. What He's building in your life. And so, hope says, I may not be seeing what I want to see right now. I may not be feeling what I want to feel right now. But there's something inside me deeper than what I see and what I feel. And it pushes me to persevere. It pushes me to keep on. That something that is pushing me on is hope. That is the hope that is within you, that you're choosing. Hope understands that what's happening in your life right now is just one scene in the overall story of your life. It is not all of your life. It is just one little plot twist for you to resolve on the journey of your happily ever after that you're looking for. And so hope is all about endurance. It is about moving forward when you don't feel like moving forward. Remember last week I talked about faith, and I said, I talked about how Jesus said you could speak to a mountain and say to that mountain, get up and be cast into the sea. Now, I've seen mountains be cast into the sea plenty of times. Huge problems, huge obstacles that God has removed in my life and in other people's lives to not believe that mountains can be cast into the sea. But I also understand that a lot of times that when you say to the mountain, be cast into the sea, it can be a long time before the mountain gets up and gets into the sea. It is not that I have these magic fingers and I snap my finger and the problem is gone. Does that happen in your life all the time? Oh, that it would, huh? But it doesn't, does it? And so a lot of times we're speaking to that problem, we're speaking to the mountain, and it just keeps on staying there for a long time before it moves. And so that's sometimes frustrating to us. Miracles don't always take place at the snap of your fingers, and for that simple reason, it takes time for our thoughts and our words and our actions to become congruent with our faith, doesn't it? That congruent faith is not an overnight thing. Where what I say I believe matches how I actually live and talk and think, and is what I live. And so that period of time between what I say that I want to believe and how I actually believe, and I see that movement, that miracle taking place, that period of time in between is where hope comes in. Hope is what gets us through that journey between what we say we believe and actually getting there in our lives. Hope, then, is that transition period. Hope is that thing that gets us there during that time, during the journey. And so hope is the journey that gets you there. So hope is not a feeling, it is an action, and hope now is endurance. It is endurance. It is that ability to keep on keeping on, even when I don't feel like it. And it's not a result of what you see or what you feel. It's a result of a choice that you dare to make and an action you dare to take. And it says, I will keep on keeping on. And hope understands what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13. Remember, Paul said that we see through a mirror darkly right now. That everything is not always really clear. We don't know how the story will end, but hope keeps us in the story. is another way of saying that. In the book of Daniel, there's an episode of three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We know these guys, right? And they trust in God. And what happens because of that? They end up being thrown into a fiery furnace. And they refused to compromise, and when their lives were on the line, they said this in Daniel 3:17 and 18. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God who serves is the God we serve rather is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Now, this really becomes a living example of hope, because they were saying, we don't know how this story is going to end for sure. I mean, we don't have any way of knowing that for sure, but win or lose, live or die, we're in this to the end, King. We're not changing. We have hope in God, and it's going to push us forward, and we're not going to turn away from the God that we serve. Now you probably know that the three men survived. But they did go through the furnace of fire, and God then brought them miraculously through that. But there's an old song that says they wouldn't bend, they wouldn't bow, and they wouldn't burn, and because they just said, you know what, we have this hope, and we're going to endure, and we're going to persevere through this. But for me, I think the most significant part of the story has always been that single phrase right in the middle of those verses. But even if he does not, talking about God. Even if he does not get us through the way we want to get through, will we enjoy that process? No. But we believe in God. Our hope is in him. And so we're going to trust in him. And so they said, God is able to save us. And they were saying, even if he's not going to, we're not going to bend. And hope is daring to endure, refusing to jump ship even when you don't know how the story will end. And then that brings us to the third choice. You got to make a decision to dare or to rejoice. You got to make a decision to endure, and you got to make a decision to dare to be a bull among the bears. Got to be a bull among the bears, and that's going to take some daring. You know what the difference is between a bull market and a bear market? We're in a bull market right now. I heard on the news last night that we had 11 straight days of record endings for the Dow, record highs. 11 straight days in a row. That's a bull market. In a bull market, what happens? Stocks and things like that are going up, and people get real excited about that, and so there's a lot of movement, and people are buying, and those kinds of things, and they're buying more and more because they're excited about the way that the things are going. And people tend to be primarily optimistic during that time. A bear market, on the other hand, is just the opposite. It's when the market is on the downswing and the prices are dropping and people begin to panic. And when they panic, they don't buy. They sell. And that panic selling tends to drive prices, even further down. But what do really savvy, smart investors do? Savvy, smart investors don't panic very easily. And so when it is a bull market, when prices are going up, they say, well, that's nice. They don't buy a whole lot. When prices are going down, they go on a bargain spree. They go hunting. They go bargain hunting. And they start looking for good bargains to buy at a cheap price. And they just know, they have the insider information that isn't that insider, but they know that the bond market and the stock market have swings. They go up and they go down, they go up and they go down. So they don't panic and they buy at the right time. And spiritually, we need to be able to do the same thing. It's hope that makes that happen. It's hope that makes us not panic easily. We don't always know how the story will end, but because we have hope, we not only stay in the game until the very end, we stay engaged in the game until the very end. we stay involved. We stay involved with our life. We stay involved with ministry. We stay involved with our families. We stay involved with what God is calling us to do. We just keep on keeping on, and we stay engaged. You've seen games, professional and otherwise, of sporting events where it's a blowout in the middle of the game. Normally what happens is a blowout in the middle of the game, everybody goes home because the team that's being blown out quits. Except in a few instances, such as the last Super Bowl, where at halftime everybody thought, well, why even bother to come back and watch the second half? Because we already know it. A lot of people left here. We were watching it in the fellowship hall. A lot of people left at halftime and said, it's going to go home now. Nothing's going to happen. But there was one team that had hope and said, you know what, we're going to stay engaged to the very end. They didn't just give up. They didn't say, oh, what's the use? They came out in the second half and changed everything around because they chose to stay engaged. They could have just as easily said, you know what, we had a good year at halftime. It's been a good year. Let's just pack it in. We'll go out and play that other 30 minutes and go home. But they said, no, we came here to engage. We're going to stay engaged to the very end. And that's what we're called to do. Hope means that you keep trying, and you keep fighting, and you keep pursuing your options, that you keep seeking out possibilities, because you never know how things might turn out. You never know what good things are going to come your way. God says you make a choice to rejoice, you make a choice to endure, and then you make a choice to not give in to panic. You just stay keeping on. And when you're tempted to think that your life or your marriage or your financial situation or your health or your job or your relationship with God has been this one never-ending bear market where it just seems to be going down and down and down and down, hope dares you to look up. Hope dares you to keep on trying. Hope dares you to stay engaged with that. And when you're going through the worst days of your life, hope is not about waiting it out. Hope is about fighting it out. It says, I'm going to get up each day and I'm going to try again. I'm just going to keep on. And hope says that at every downturn that comes your way, that you will say, I will not panic just because something unwanted and unexpected has come into my life. Instead, I will keep my eyes open, I will keep my heart receptive, and my mind engaged as I bulldoze my way to the other side of the situation. Whatever the outcome is at the other side, I'm going to trust God that it's going to be for my good. That's why Paul says in verse 5, and hope does not disappoint. When I decide to choose hope and act on hope with perseverance and endurance and not give in, then I'm not going to be disappointed. It's because our hope is not in ourselves, but our hope is in God who gave His Son for us, who sent Him to the cross and who raised Him from the dead 3 days later. That is the God that we have, and He is not going to disappoint us. That's why in Romans 8:37, Paul says, in all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. Not because we're strong, but because He is strong, but because of what He has done. And so to be more than a conqueror means that you stay in the fight as long as it takes, that you don't panic, that you don't run, that you don't quit, that you just keep on keeping on. You don't check out emotionally or just resign yourself to waiting it out. You keep swinging and you keep plugging away. Paul wrote, remember, in his very last letter, some of the very last words we have from the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy from his prison cell. He said this, he said, I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness. Paul is an old man. His body has been just broken to pieces over the years. I know he's tired, and he's in jail. He's in prison. He's pretty sure he's not getting out, and that he's going to die there very soon. But the next thing he has to say is interesting. He says to Timothy, hey, by the way, after he says, I know I'm about to go home to be with the Lord. But, he said, Timothy, would you send Mark around, John Mark? He's helpful to me. He's useful to me. And when he comes, would you tell him to bring my books and the parchments? Parchments were probably blank sheets to write on. Why would Paul want that? Because he said, you know what? I still have a hope. I am still going to endure. I'm still going to persevere. I am not checking out. Just because I know that my life is soon coming to an end doesn't mean I'm going to quit at this point. And so he said, you know, if he can get here, I still got work to do, and I'm going to do it. I may not like the circumstances where I'm going to do it, but I like what's going to be the outcome of it. And so go ahead and send Mark over here and let me get involved with some of that. That's hope. You just keep making plans. You keep moving forward. And you can be sure that when your time is up, God will let you know. But until then, keep making plans and keep moving forward. Even when the market is bearish, hope gives you the courage to dare to be a bull. To say, I'm going to not give in to the panic. So one thing this morning as we close, because we've got to get out of here, that we can be sure of is that we're going to go through pain and sorrow and trials and tribulations. Can't get around that. Being religious is no exemption. And Jesus said, rain falls on the just and the unjust. And some people's strategy in dealing with life storms is to wishfully think, maybe it just won't happen to me. But it does happen. It happens to all of us. Some people will say, maybe if I ignore this problem, it'll just go away. It never just goes away. Doesn't happen. Some people think, maybe I can wish it away, but you can't wish it away. They don't go away. The problems are going to be there. So you're going to have to make a choice. You have to make a choice to outlast your problems. And overcoming your problem has nothing to do with wishful thinking. It has everything to do with calculated choices. Choosing calculated hope. You dare to rejoice even when you don't feel like rejoicing. You dare to endure even when it's easier to quit. And you dare to be a bull among the bears. You dare to just keep fighting it out until you get to the end. Now the rest of the world may look at your life and they may say something as cynical as, you know, the verdict is in and you lose. Look at your life. You're a loser. It's done. It's over. You're never going to get out of this situation. The verdict is in. You may as well give up. Others may be saying that about you right now. Fact is, you may be saying that about yourself right now. That the verdict is in and nothing's going to change. But I want you to know that today's verdict is not final. It is not final. Hope empowers you to live with the expectation that the verdict of tomorrow will reverse the verdict of today. You don't get to write your story. If you have hope, God writes it for you. And what you think is the verdict today, God says, I have a different verdict tomorrow. You can trust me in that. You can hope in that. And that means regardless of how things may appear on the surface, God is in work in your life behind the scenes to make good things